I think we need a declaration for independence. And that's the talk, a declaration for independence. Now you see what that means, though, by stepping back a little bit from that declaration, by focusing first on what I want to think of as a problem. Actually, it's your problem, or our problem. It's a pattern that we've gotten into. Maybe a pathology we have. The pathology, a pattern, the pathology of fours. So every fourth year, we wake up, and there's an explosion of democratic energy. And after the explosion, we go back to sleep. Right? It's around this idea, the president, that we have this party, right? This activism, the wilds of 1, 2, 3, 4, we're here, the fourth night, the fourth year, and then we crash. It's our Thursday night out. Thursday, right? What's that word mean? Thunder, right? Thunder. It's the idea that in this one night, we have all of our hopes invested, our dreams, that in this one moment, we can do something. Everything depends on this one night. Everything is focused on this 1 year, as if in this 1 year we can save us. Now the problem here, of course, is it won't. The problem is that we depend too much, we need too much, we rely too much on this 1 year, on this fourth night, and it blinds us to the fact that there's something much more fundamental missing here. Something much more fundamental that we need to see, something much more fundamental which is wrong in the way this government works. And we need to see that. We need to see this something fundamental. We need to see that we need something better than Thursday night in order to effect change. So the framers of our Constitution were obsessed with the idea of independence. And I don't mean the independence of 1776. I mean independence in the sense they thought about it around 1785. For about 1785, most who thought about it anyway carefully in America began to recognize that America was a failure. An extraordinary corruption had spread through this land of a Republican ideal, and the corruption was tied to this idea of independence. The problem was representatives lacked independence. They were instead dependents. They were dependents on interests other than the public interest. As Jefferson said, this dependence begets subservience in venality, suffocates the germ of virtue, and prepares fit tools for the designs of ambition. This is what government had become. And they sought non-dependent representatives, independent representatives who could find the right answer for the right reason. Their common aim was to build institutions, constitutions, that would wage war against that dependence. Now we should admit, 200 years later, they failed. Many who were drawn to government were drawn for the most venal of reasons. Corruption continued to rage through, especially the 19th century, much worse than anything we see today. Here's Daniel Webster, who was a member of Congress. At the time he was a member of Congress, he was voting and introducing bills as it related to the Bank of the United States. He was also simultaneously employed by the Bank of the United States. He wrote the bank one day, said, "If it be wished that my relation to the bank be continued, it may be well to send me the usual retainers." Bribery was not even illegal in Congress until 1853. The 19th century was a cesspool of corruption, and not just among politicians. In some districts, up to 25% of the voters simply sold their vote. So my story here is not of some golden past of great democratic ideals which we have in some sense lost. The past was awful in different ways, and we are much better today. Much better today. But ironically, even though the people who populate our government, members of Congress, are much better today, the problem of corruption is much worse today. And that's because government today is much more significant, much more critical to core national problems like healthcare and global warming. It's much more pervasive. Its fingers are everywhere. And increasingly, businesses think the tools of competition include manipulating the government. The return from regulation is often higher than the return from competition. Better to build a better lobbyist than a better widget. And thus there's an explosion of this influence game here. The number of lobbyists in Washington since 2000 has doubled. And the cost of lobbyists in Washington since 2000 has doubled as well. As the former chief lobbyist for the Clinton administration put it, people in industry are willing to invest money because they see opportunities here. And the public sees it too. Public skepticism has never been higher about the way Congress functions. Respect for Congress has never been lower. In my district, when I considered running, we did a poll and found 88% of the Democrats in my district believe money buys results. Nationally, 19%, lower than President Bush, have a favorable opinion of our Congress. The people's house, the people believe, is not the people's house. Now, the thing to recognize is that the dependency that Congress has on private money in order to elect themselves to office is exactly the dependency our framers were worried about. Indeed, it is much worse than the dependency that they were worried about. Madison was obsessed with a certain kind of problem, the problem of the poor gathering together and stealing the money from the rich. It's the problem Reagan echoed again and again. In 1965, he gave this speech, and he said, "Democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves, large S, out of the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidate promising the most benefits from the treasury, with the result that democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy." But of course, the problem we face now is not that the poor have gathered together and somehow raped the governments and burdened the rich. That's not our problem. It's exactly the opposite. It's that the rich have found a way to capture government and exploit it against the interests of all of us. They use power to capture government. And so long as private funding funds public elections, that capture will remain. Crony capitalism is at the core of the government we now live, and it will remain that way until we change the core of that government. It is a subtle form of corruption. Not the Daniel Webster corruption, much more subtle, by good people, but deadly for democracy. Now, many people look at this and they say, okay, Washington's filled with all these sort of people, insiders playing these games, so what? What is the actual harm? There's a theoretical harm, we all get it, bending the way government works, but what is the practical cost here? And there are different kind of costs. There's costs for people who live on the right. For example, this is the Communications Act. It has 6 titles. Title 2 regulates something called telecom, what would be in the internet space DSL. Title 6 regulates cable. A year into the administration, Al Gore gave a speech in UCLA where he described a proposal they were thinking about to take these 2 separate titles that regulated internet services and put them under one title, Title 7, and that Title 7 would essentially deregulate internet services. So Title 2, which heavily regulated DSL, would be modified substantially to effectively deregulate DSL. His team took the idea to Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill's response was, hell no. How are we going to raise money from the telecoms if we deregulate them? And you begin to see a dynamic that we don't talk about enough. It's a dynamic we should call what it is. It is extortion. Right? It's a government that crafts itself, reaches its fingers far enough so that it has leverage to force those whom it regulates to support members as they need to be reelected. And the question people on the right need to ask more and more is, how much extortion-enabling regulation is there out there? And how much less would there be were there public funding of public elections? But of course, the point's not just one for the right, there's also one for the left and right. The point for the left and right is to focus and see the way in which government is queered, bent. It gets the wrong answer to the right questions when it focuses in a context where money is constantly in the background. Now, people say wrong. How could there ever be a wrong answer for government? These are hard questions. Politics, there's Democrats and Republicans. These are not hard questions. There's just differences in values. But the point to recognize is that not all questions the government addresses are hard cases. There are easy cases. There's the 2 + 2 = 4 of government. So, for example, we spent, in the movement I came from, the free culture movement, about 10 years fighting one set of these issues around copyright. And this battle gets born around October 27th, 1998, when Congress passes the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Protection Act, which extended the term of copyright by 20 years for existing and new work. Now, we were fighting this for a lot of reasons, but at the core of why we were fighting it was a basic policy question. Did this law, which extended the term of existing copyrights by 20 years, the 11th time Congress had done that in the past 40 years, actually advance the public good? So when we took this case to the Supreme Court, we had a brief that was filed on our half charging that this did not advance the public good, signed by 17 economists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners, including Ronald Coase, James Buchanan, and Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman said he would only sign the brief if the word no-brainer existed somewhere in the brief. But of course, apparently, there were no brains here when Congress actually passed the brief. Or think in the context of nutrition. There's a consensus among those who study the matter that we eat too much of this stuff, not enough of this stuff. In 2003, the World Health Organization thought they tried to advance the knowledge about this consensus by promulgating a standard that said no more than 10% of your daily caloric intake should come from added sugar. Well, the sugar industry, despite their sweet little logo here, was not at all happy about this resolution. They went ballistic. There they are, ballistic. They started threatening through the United States Senate to withdraw funding from the WHO if they didn't back down from this outrageous position. There's the Senate's letter signed by Larry Craig threatening this back down unless they would adopt the reasonable position from the perspective of the sugar industry, which was 25% of your daily caloric intake should come from added sugar. Well, the WHO didn't back down, but 2003, our government did. The Food Nutrition Board in 2003 adopted standards that said, yes, 25% of your daily caloric intake should come from sugar. That's a balanced diet, according to our government. So what would that mean? It means that you could start breakfast with Fruit Loops and M&Ms, a glass of milk. Then for lunch, you can have a cheeseburger. For dinner, you can have pepperoni pizza, actually 3 slices of pepperoni pizza, and cookies. Yes, sugar cookies for dinner. That's a balanced diet, according to our government. This is another easy case, which our government gets fundamentally wrong. Or think about perhaps the most profound example of this fundamental error, the questions of global warming. Of course, there's now a recognition, a consensus, even increasingly on the right, a consensus about the problems of global warming. But long before Davis Guggenheim took Al Gore's speech and made it a tipping point in this consensus, there was a consensus among scientists. The consensus, as Gore sums it up, was that we're doing it. Indeed, it has 5 points in this consensus. As Gore states it, the debate's over. Number 1, global warming is real. Number 2, we human beings are mainly responsible. Number 3, consequences are very bad. Number 4, we need to fix it quickly. And number 5, it's not too late. Now, they tried to study how widespread this consensus was among serious scientists. So they did a random study of 1,000 articles in peer-reviewed journals between 1993 and 2003 discussing global warming. They found that 0%, exactly 0, of these articles questioned the consensus. Then they did a study of articles in popular media journals, 600 popular media articles between 1988 and 2002. They found that 53% of those articles questioned the basic consensus. And the reason for that questioning was the obvious effect of junk science that had been fueled and funded by an oil industry keen to get the attention of America focused somewhere else, leading to an extraordinary delay, maybe 10-year delay, in us addressing perhaps the most important public policy question we as a nation face. Another easy question that we get wrong. These are all easy cases that the government gets wrong, and not just in the esoteric area of freeing Mickey, but in the core areas, the most important areas, the 2 + 2 = 4 areas of government gets wrong. This is the cost, a profound cost of this existing dependency that skews the way government functions. But even this misses a fundamental point. The problem with the existing dependency of government is not big government. It's not even the wrong answers big government gives. The fundamental problem with the dependency that is our government today is the consequence for trust that we have in our government. So think, for example, about how trust gets built. Context of medicine. There's this drug, Alteplase. It deals with what we used to call strokes. The current correct term for strokes is brain attack, much more dramatic. 1998, the American Heart Association did a study of this drug, Alteplase. The conclusion of the study was that this was safe and effective. There was support for the drug. There was also a dissent. But when they published the report in 2000, they eliminated the dissent. Indeed, they eliminated the name of the doctor who had dissented from the conclusion, just releasing a report supporting the release of the drug. Then it was discovered by the British Medical Journal that Genentech, the drug company that was behind this drug, had given the AHA $11 million, raising obvious questions. And as Lessig described it, this recommendation may have been made in the true spirit of unbiased scientific inquiry, but the appearance of dispassionate analysis was eroded by large donations from a drug company. Obviously so. When we see a complex question and we recognize money was in the mix, we are automatically led to the conclusion something fishy was going on. We are automatically led to lose the trust we have in that institution. We can't help but question it. So compare, for example, think about this recent issue decided last week here in this city about Telco Immunity. March 14th, House of Representatives voted to reject Telco Immunity. This is immunity for telephone companies that cooperated with George Bush, presumptively to violate the civil rights of Americans who were spied on by the Bush administration after 9/11. But on June 20th, Congress passed Telco Immunity. 94 members of Congress switched their vote. Why did they switch their vote? Well, MapLight organization, on whose board I sit, did a study of this question. They looked at the contributions to members of Congress, members of Democrats, and then Democrats who switched their vote. They found that Democrats who switched their vote on telco immunity received 2 times the money from telco companies that Democrats who had not switched their vote received. Now, of course, all of them say, look, it's not about the money, it's about the complicated question of whether government should be blah, 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 blah. But the point is, what do we expect the public to believe when the story is those who switch, and also happen to receive twice the money from the interests whom they are now protecting? Both of these stories are pointing to the same dynamic. It's a dynamic about the conditions for trust. Money destroys those conditions. It destroys trust. It destroys the possibility of trust. So when you look at a district like mine where 88% of the people think government is bought by contributions in campaigns, the response we should have is, what the hell do you expect? What else are they going to think? We can't build trust in what government does. We won't build trust in what government does. We won't have faith in what government does until we can believe, as we all want to be able to believe, that they got what they got wrong because they were stupid or because there were more Democrats than the Republicans or more Republicans than Democrats, but not because of money in the mix. That's what we need to understand if we're going to trust what government does, and right now we simply cannot believe that. We need here more than Thursdays to solve this problem. We need more than every 4 years in this quadannual hope fest to solve this problem. This is our cycle, right? There is a place called hope. Hope, action, change. God, hope. This is our constant focus, but we need something more sustained than this, something more focused than this, if we're to get change here. And it's this recognition that led Joe Trippi and I to think about focusing this urgent need for change in exactly the place that it needs it the most, Congress. And launching 3 months ago now, a Change Congress movement, which is designed to be a bipartisan reform movement that will leverage the reform work of others. Others who have been raising awareness around these issues for the last 35 years. Others who have built the knowledge we need to explain to the world why these problems need to be addressed, but to take the work that these others have done and find a way to mash it up into an active netroots organization supporting reform around a cluster of issues. First issue is money, then representation, then maybe integrity in the way government functions, but then using these new tools, or I like to think of new tools, to drive this reform, to begin this process of changing the way this government functions. Now, the first tools we deploy build on an idea that we had in the context of copyright. We launched this movement, Creative Commons, which was focused on giving people the ability to mark their creative work, not with the restrictions they want, but the freedoms they want. So it was a voluntary pledge by those who had the power to make a pledge. And that's the same idea in the context of Change Congress. We ask citizens and candidates, those with the power here, to signal their support for 4 fundamental principles of reform. Number 1, that the candidate would not take money from lobbyists and PACs. Number 2, that they would reform fundamentally the way earmarks function. Number 3, they would support public financing of public elections. And number 4, they would increase the transparency in the way government functions. And I was proud that my friend and former colleague, the day after he had presumptive nomination and control over the DNC, got the DNC to announce that the DNC would not itself take any more money from lobbyists and PACs. It's a start. It's the pledge that I think we all need to see all of our candidates adopt. And that's the first part of what we're doing. The second part, though, is to then go out and tag members and candidates who haven't taken a pledge to see where they are, where they stand on this issue, through a kind of army of wiki workers here who will increasingly build this map that reflects exactly where the nation is on reform, both Democrats and Republicans, how close we are to getting some kind of change, and then leverage that knowledge using an Emily's List-like technique to begin to fund reform, so that people can go to the site and say, here is exactly the kind of change I want, and then a list of those who support that change is presented, and these people you can give $10 a month for 5 months to support. Now, the aim of all three of these efforts is to build the first step toward a sustainable effort at change, to change this system of dependency. But the real reason I wanted to fling myself from California last night, at the middle of the night, indeed 2 o'clock in the morning, to come here to talk to you was to recruit. Because what we need here is your skills, your passions, your insight. We need your ideas and plans and code. We need you to help us build this infrastructure of reform, this wiki infrastructure of reform. For a law professor and even a guy as talented as Trippy are not going to be able to build this alone. So my first plea to you is that you go here, you volunteer here, you code here to join us in this process. Because if not, 100% of your cycles right now, because I know there's lots going on right now. After all, we got to get ready for Thursday night out, right? Then at least 10%. Give me 10% of your cycles. 10% towards this end of changing this institution, this core cause of the corruption that is our government right now. So there is a flaw at the core of the people's house. That flaw is a kind of dependency. We need to change that dependency, but we won't change it through this quadannual practice of Thursdays. It's just not enough. And we need to break our dependency on Thursdays, on presidential elections, as on the thunderclap of transformation, if we're going to break their dependency on money. Break their dependency. We all understand the nature of the problem. Dependencies? Right? Think about the alcoholic. All of you know or have been hurt by or maybe have hurt others because of alcoholism. So think of the problems of an alcoholic. Alcoholic could be losing his family, his job, his liver. These are really, really significant problems. But what we all recognize about the alcoholic is until he solves his alcoholism first, he won't solve any of these, the most important problems. So it's not that alcohol is the most important problem, it's just the first problem that he needs to solve. And so too is it with us. There is no end to the extraordinarily significant problems that our nation faces right now. From global warming to Iraq, to the economy, to education again, to broadband growth, and to copyright even. But we won't address these problems sensibly until we solve this first problem first. That's the change that we need, to change this first problem. So join me in changing this Congress as this first problem. Thank you very much.